This podcast is being brought to you by LegalYogi.com. That is legal-yogi.com.
In today's discussion, we'll be answering about divorce and marriage separation. I am here with attorney Michael Hashim of Hashim and Spinola, located at Wendell Avenue in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Hello, attorney Hashim. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Ready?
Okay. Are there any specific guidelines that you advise your clients to follow between initiating the divorce and the time that the divorce is final?
Well, there are a lot of different things that need to be considered. I would often recommend that people be above board with their spouse as to assets and income, not try to hide things, because that often comes back to haunt them at a later date. You, even though you're separated, you're still legally married, and although there's no black letter law in this, I would often recommend to people who are separated that say there's another person out there, another relationship that they may be involved in, that they try to cool that relationship and not necessarily be open and obvious about it, because that tends to throw gas on the fire, and oftentimes will aggravate the other spouse and make what could sometimes be an uncontested matter into a contested matter.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense. You don't want to take something where you're going to come to a compromise easily and overcomplicate it over foolishness.
Correct.
Yeah, to be smart about it. That makes a lot of sense.
In this day and age, people sometimes don't consider that, and a lot of times it's not a big issue, but sometimes, especially in a longer marriage, if a husband or wife sees that their spouse is now involved with another person, they tend to be less willing to come to terms.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Now, do you have any divorce tips that you can offer for someone that has a limited budget? Maybe they feel they can't afford legal fees.
Well, just be very organized with, if you can't afford legal fees and you want to do it on your own, try to come to an agreement, write it out as much as possible, and cover all the issues that are out there. And again, sometimes it's helpful to seek counsel, but if you're going to seek counsel in that circumstance, try to just organize as much as possible on your own.
Yeah, reduce the amount of time and intervention you need.
Correct. Try to resolve all the issues between you and your spouse. Lay out all the assets and income that you have. Try to come to terms as far as visitation and support, things of that nature.
Now, how do laws differ for same-sex couples?
Well, technically they shouldn't differ. They should be the same, but unfortunately there are some differences. And basically a lot of the differences occur as a result of the fact that some states allow same-sex marriages and some states don't. And that can create significant problems. It can create a problem, for example, that if a couple same-sex couple gets legally married in one state, say Massachusetts, and then moves to another state that does not recognize same-sex marriage, and then they decide they want to divorce, they're going to have complicated issues, because the domicile where they reside does not recognize their marriage.
Okay, so do they have to go back to the state that they got married in?
Well, we're getting into a complicated area. In some cases, they do have to go back to a state that recognizes same-sex marriage. Not necessarily the state they were married in, but at least to a state that recognizes same-sex marriage, and then they would have to, believe it or not, establish their domicile in that state, which means they could be required to live there for a certain period of time.
Oh, so that does sound like it's complicated, and then in these cases they probably would want legal counsel.
Oh, they will definitely need legal counsel if they're in that kind of a situation, and there's some movement in this area now where they're starting to change the rules and make it a little less difficult established domicile in this kind of a situation, but they definitely will need counsel, I believe.
There are other types of marriages that are treated differently, such as military marriage?
No, generally military marriages are treated the same as other marriages.
Okay. Now, I've heard of people refusing to sign divorce papers. What are a person's options in this case? Can a divorce be finalized if the other party refuses to sign the divorce papers?
Yes, they can. I mean, if the person won't accept the papers in the states that would allow that to happen, then the sheriff can serve that person and prepare a so-called return of service, indicating that he's served the spouse, and the other spouse can then go forward with the divorce without the presence of the one who refuses to accept the papers.
Okay, so it can be finalized. It can go before a judge and...
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, the TV doesn't let you believe that. You see on TV all the time where it's just, oh, I can't get a divorce, they won't sign, but that's not the case.
The party doesn't need to sign. I mean, he can be served with the papers by a sheriff or a constable. Again, that depends on the state, and the other party, as long as he has proof that there was adequate service and he presents that to the court with a so-called return of service, then he can proceed. I mean, the court's going to want to make sure that the party who's not present was actually served, and they're going to want to verify that. But if the service was good, then he should be able to go forward.
Oh, okay, that's very interesting, because that's definitely something that it must be a myth out there, because you just always hear that.
Well, there sometimes is a divergence between Hollywood and reality.
Yeah,
this might be one of those cases.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, we're just about finished up here, and I just wanted to remind the audience that we will be getting more into child custody, visitation rights, and child support. I think that'll have a segment all on its own, and then there will be another segment, regarding real estate and divorce and the division of community property. But there's a few questions that are kind of touching on that, but just in general, can someone contest a prenuptial agreement?
Yes, they can. A prenuptial agreement can be contested, but if it's properly drawn by an attorney, and I would, in that situation, recommend that each party have an attorney, and the proper disclosures are made, it's hard to contest a prenuptial agreement if it's done properly.
Okay, right. So it's how it's done in the beginning, is what you're saying. The
absolutely.
Initial.
There has to be a complete disclosure of financial, at least in Massachusetts, and I think that's true in most states. There has to be a complete disclosure of financial status to each party, and that has to be in writing. So typically, people who are about ready to enter into a prenuptial agreement will exchange financial statements, which have to be complete, and they should each be represented by their own attorney. They should not use one attorney, and so in that circumstance, the prenuptial, if done properly, should be upheld. But it can be modified on occasion if there's a significant change of circumstances, or if, for example, there's a child involved, something of that nature may allow a modification. But typically, it can be upheld if it's properly drawn.
Okay. Okay. And now, is there such a thing as a divorce case, being settled out of court, or are we again touching on an uncontested divorce that just gets signed off?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to, if a case is settled out of court, it's basically an uncontested divorce where the parties have arranged or come to an agreement.
Okay. And now, when would you advise to take a divorce case to court and have it heard before the judge? And I believe we may have even touched on this before. It's generally, property and assets and children.
If you and your spouse cannot come to an agreement, then you're going to have to let a judge decide it, and that's the circumstance. So if you're far apart on a property division, if you, for example, feel that something should not be divided the way your spouse wants to divide it, then you have little choice but to go before a judge.
And now, is it usually just a judge, or is there some type of jury or panel as well?
No, it's typically a judge. And most divorces, or all divorces, I think throughout the United States, are handled just by judges, not juries.
And now, how does this play out? Is this where both parties, the couple, goes to court and sits there and listens to the findings? I mean, how does that play out?
Well, you actually, in most states, you would actually have a trial, and up before you get to the trial, though, you go through the discovery process, which is like any civil litigation, allows you to seek information from the other party, which is done by way of interrogatories or requests for documents or even depositions in certain cases. And you gather all of your facts and information through that discovery process, so-called, and then you're assigned a trial date. And depending on the complications of the case and the extent of the property that the parties have, it can be a 2-hour trial, or it can be a 5-day trial, or even longer. And it's an actual trial before a judge who will listen to the evidence from both sides, and he will make findings of fact based on the evidence he hears, and he'll make a determination of what the issues are. He'll decide how much child support needs to be paid, how much spousal support, if any, needs to be paid, how the property will be divided between the parties, and issues relative to custody, how often, who will have custody, whether it will be joint or single custody, and what the visitation arrangement will be. Right.
Well, we're just about finished up here. Do you think you could give our audience one important thing to remember? Maybe one important thing to avoid, one do and one don't, if you will?
Well, I think the most important thing is to try to be as upfront as you can with your attorney. Provide him with all the information. The last thing he needs to do is he or she needs to do is be surprised by facts that maybe aren't favorable to your case. I often tell people, if I have the unfavorable information, I can deal with it in a positive fashion. Sometimes people think that if they hide things or don't disclose things, that they won't come out. Eventually, everything comes out. So I would say the most important thing to do is to be upfront with your attorney and let them know everything, even if it's not favorable to you, or if you think it's not favorable.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for your time. I think that all this information will definitely, help the listeners. I want to remind everyone that we will have additional segments that will be solely about child custody, visitation rights, and child support, and also followed by another segment that will focus solely on real estate and divorce and the division of community property and divorce, as well as the division of assets.
This podcast was brought to you by LegalYogi.com, providing hundreds of free legal consultations every day since 1999. Our database contains over 160,000 legal and financial professionals, and our phone line is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you would like a free legal consultation, you can call 1-800-397-1755 from any state in the U.S., and we'll be happy to provide you with a free legal consultation. Our web address and phone number are on the podcast image for your convenience, or you can simply go to LegalYogi.com. That is LegalYogi.com.